Hello everybody. Today I'm here to talk to you about chapter 13, sort of. This lecture doesn't really even have the same title as chapter 13 does because I decided to go in sort of a slightly different direction with it. Okay, so we're going to do a little something different to start with. We're going to do a little bit of a check-in with yourself because this is an online lecture. We can't do it together, but we can certainly kind of do a self-check-in, if you will. So I want you to think about what your stress level is today. You can put a number on it if you like, or you can describe it if that is your preference. And then I want you to just spend a couple of minutes thinking about what is one thing you can actually do in the next day to mediate stress. So this isn't like, calm down or anything like that. Like it is something you can actually say, okay, I did that. I went for a 15-minute walk, or I did, 10 counted breaths, or whatever, it probably shouldn't be, I went out and had a drink, but yeah, think about something that you can do in the next day that is kind of not too challenging to help you mediate your stress level. Okay, so note, this lecture is even less about the book than normal. We are just not going to get a chance to talk about emotions much. They really are important, obviously, but, we cover that in other places. And to me, it felt more important for us to cover more about stress and executive function and how they interact with health and what the connections between all of those things are. So let's talk about health first. So in the context of stress, obviously we're not going to watch this video together, but in the context of stress, when you go off to watch this video and then come back to the lecture, I want you to think about, as you're watching it, how do all the components of health that the video goes into relate to emotion and stress, right? How are these things related? It's not something that they necessarily specifically outline in the video, but it is a little bit of a thought exercise for you to complete. So please go off, watch that video. It's only about 4 minutes long or so, and then come back. Okay, so hopefully you have watched the video and returned, and I just want you to continue to think about those relationships, because as we go forward in the lecture, it's going to be a fairly short one, actually. As we go forward in the lecture, it's going to be important to think about those things. It's also, by the way, related very deeply to the New York Times article that you're going to read in the module. Okay, so remember this. The diathesis stress model of illness we've talked about before, and in this example we're talking about schizophrenia, and we're talking about how there's some sort of genetic predisposition to illness plus an environmental stressor. And then there's some set of mitigators that, kind of take the weight off of one of these things, or both of these things, I suppose, the way that I've set up the equation here. And that leads to some level of illness, right? And when we look at this specific example, you can kind of see it play out. So, there's a very strong genetic link between a very strong genetic link between families and the expression of schizophrenia in any one individual in that family, and it's pretty easy to map out. It's pretty easy to rely on. The numbers are pretty clear, and interestingly, they're clear worldwide. It's not really dependent on culture, which is very, very strong evidence that this is a genetically linked disease in very strong ways. So family members with schizophrenia, basically the more DNA you share with them, the greater the risk that you have to develop it. And then there's a whole long list, and this is just a few of them, of environmental stressors that have been shown to relate to developing schizophrenia. And again, I've just listed a few of them here. Trauma and stress are really at the top of those, at the top of that list. But cannabis and amphetamines, this one is trickier than most people think. So cannabis is classified as a hallucinogen. And the thing about a hallucinogen with somebody who already has a vulnerability to a psychotic disorder, it's not a good combination. And we did talk about that when we talked about consciousness and how using cannabis and other medications can sort of exacerbate that genetic predisposition. This is just another way to talk about it again. Birth month does matter. Obstetric complications does matter. Being born and living in a city, it's actually not enough to be one or the other. You have to have both. If you're looking at birth month and you're like, what? That doesn't make sense. They don't exactly know why this is. It probably has something to do with allergies or environmental things that are seasonal that the gestating parent was exposed to, or that the baby was exposed to. But it's not clear. They don't really know for sure. The mitigators, the early intervention programs, really, really good in general. Do they have long-term impacts? Unclear. Probably not. But they do make a big difference in those initial years of experiencing psychotic symptoms. Proper and ongoing treatment, proper social support, all big mitigators. And all of these things together come together to create kind of the final picture of illness. Now, of course, the illness changes over time with age. Things like this tend to get worse because, proper treatment is harder to come by, supports fall away. Those early intervention programs are no longer available because you're no longer in your early illness. That sort of thing. So over time, severe mental illness does have a tendency to get worse over time. So the idea here is that genetics and stress are both components of illness, and that's why the chapter is called Emotion, Stress, and Health, right? Because that stressor and that health really do come together to create illness. And emotions are very much a stressor in our lives, and they do impact our health. And Dr. Sapolsky will talk about that at some good length in his video that we're going to cover later on. So let's talk a little bit about executive function. We talked about this a little bit when we were talking about, when we were in chapter 8 about intelligence and thinking. But before we chat about it in more specifics, why are we talking about this today, right? Like, why are we talking about this in the emotion, stress, and health chapter? So, first of all, executive function issues are both a cause and an effect of stress. And we'll see that kind of play out when we talk about some examples. And they are very prevalent at the moment. This is an abnormally high stress time in society as a whole. The COVID era after effects, including some really serious attention issues, especially among people who were in early high school years as COVID was hitting, and those folks are now in college, right? And that is major, major, major shift in how executive function is kind of at the forefront of real life. You know, it has real impacts on how people are functioning. So, you know, all of these things are kind of landing on us all at once. You know, the political issues, the social issues, the economic issues, all together. You know, these all are stressors, and they all impact our executive functioning. And the mental health stuff too. You know, the higher rates of anxiety and depression come from all of these things, but they also to a certain extent cause them, right? So you cannot take a specific directionality from anything. You have to sort of assume that they all impact each other in a bidirectional way. Okay? So understanding what the issue is and how the mechanism works for how our functioning is impacted by these factors, hopefully it decreases the self-blame, and because the self-blame really makes it difficult to make a effective change. You know, we get very stuck in blaming ourselves for, you know, not being able to focus, not being able to do a better job, not being able to meet the expectations of others. We get really stuck in that. And then we just don't make good changes. So hopefully this will help us with that situation. Okay, so this should look familiar to you. We saw this again in Chapter 8. Executive function is a component of cognition, right? Cognition includes all of these things in different weights, and different parts of them are more important at any one moment than another. You know, there are situations where our judgment is at the forefront. There are situations where our memory is at the forefront, our attention is at the forefront, and so on and so forth. And executive function is a component of this, but also kind of underlays all of these things as well. Because once we look at the components of an executive function, you can see that they really include all of these aspects. Okay, so this is most of them, not necessarily all of them. And, you know, obviously this slide is a huge simplification of what executive function is and what it entails, but it'll kind of get you rolling. The idea here is that executive function is basically the mind's traffic rules. It helps you know where to go, what signals to follow, how fast to go, how slow to go, when to stop, when to kind of pivot, that sort of thing. And how, not only when to stay on course, but how to stay on course towards your goals. So inhibition is essentially your filter, right? Inhibition is your ability to stop yourself from doing or saying things that would not benefit you in the long run, right? We all know people who are not particularly good at this. And, you know, this is partially age dependent. Very young people, very old people have a tendency to be low on inhibition. Some, to a certain extent, because of lack of brain development in the case of children, but also some degeneration in the case of older folks. But also many older folks will tell you that they just don't care anymore and they're happy to tell you exactly what they think, and they no longer care, what people think about their opinions. So that is not an inhibition problem. They are very well aware of what they're saying and how they're saying it. They just don't care. Um, so self-monitoring is, am I on track with the rules and standards? Am I doing this the way that people expect me to do it? Am I accomplishing what I expect to accomplish? Or am I outside the crowd so far that I'm really not walking the same path as everybody else? And being able to be aware of that is a component of executive function. Emotional regulation is being able to reduce extreme reactions. So it is related to inhibition to a certain extent, but to be able to, it's not just your external reaction, which is what inhibition is about. It's also about your internal state. So your ability to kind of get a leash on your feelings instead of having your feelings get a leash on you. That is definitely a component of executive function. Initiation is beginning a task. If you are somebody with ADHD, you probably know exactly what initiation is and why it's a problem. Materials organization is having a system. Like I know that, if I set up this way, if I make sure that that my environment is set up in a certain way, that I've set up my schedule in a certain way, that I'm going to be able to achieve more, right? Strategy formation, very closely related to materials organization, but more strategically, right? It's about thinking ahead and planning. Folks who are really good at counting backwards so that they arrive at something on time. So if I'm teaching a class at 12:30 and I know that it takes me half an hour to get there and 15 minutes to set up and everything, to be able to count back from 12:30 to 11:45 and know that that's the time that I have to leave the house. And then, you can go further than that. How long does it take me to eat lunch? How long does it take me to, take a shower and get dressed and feed the cat and all of that stuff? And you can count all the way back and figure out what time you need to wake up, right? And some people are really, really good at this, and some people are not good at this at all. And I think this one is a really good example of how you can train yourself to be better at these things, right? Some of them lend themselves more and some of them lend themselves less to training and improvement. But strategy formation is a really good example of one that lends itself well to practice, right? Because this, being able to do that, being able to count backwards, we can all count backwards, right? The trick with this one is actually knowing how long each one of those things takes, right? And so it's not so much about the counting backwards part, but an accurate idea of how long you take to do those things. And that can be worked out with practice, right? You can figure that out by spending some time paying attention to it. So, it's just a really good way to demonstrate that you can work on your executive function skills in a sort of conscious way. Shifting, very closely related to initiation, except that shifting is going from one task to the next, and initiation is just starting something. They can be very similar because, if you are, shifting from, making lunch to getting started at work, then it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, right? But you can see how they're kind of different concepts. And then working memory, right? Which is just the brain's scratch pad. And this one is an example of an area of executive function there really is not a whole lot you can do about, right? Whereas in strategy formation, you can spend some time training yourself to get better at that. Working memory isn't really trainable. It would be very difficult to meaningfully impact the amount of working memory that you have. So there's parts of these that lend themselves more and parts that lend themselves less to intervention. Okay, so I'm gonna play this video for you.
Nice kitty.
So this is my daughter when she was 13 months old. The example here is about kind of the development of executive function in practice. So, she's showing us here inhibition, and she's showing that in this instance, at least, she did not grab a chunk of cat and run off, But there are certainly other instances where that's essentially what happened. But, being able to develop these skills is not about being able to do them perfectly 100% of the time, right? These very early forms of these skills are not going to be perfect. They're not always going to be successful, and so we need to reinforce those positive practice sessions. Basically, when she reaches out and touches the cat and does it appropriately, to basically throw her a party, be like, oh, really good work, and in that way we can really encourage these skills to develop in children, because if we don't encourage the skills to develop, it is very difficult for them to just start developing them later, right? So the other part of very, very early executive function skills is early working memory. Being able to hold more than one direction in your head while you do the first thing. So, that's just very rudimentary kind of executive function stuff. So, though children might have these skills in place, falling into place, they might have real trouble with implementing them at the right time, right? They might need a lot of coaching and strong scaffolding. And it always kind of bothers me a little bit when people are like, well, my kid is just not good at that. My kid is not good at waiting. My kid is not good at, starting a task or whatever. Well, that's sort of your job as the parent, is to put in a situation where they get better at those things, right? So it's tricky, right? Because we want to give them autonomy, but at the same time we have to guide them.
Nice kitty.
Okay, so continued development of executive function in adulthood, it's not like it stops, right? So you can see this very sharp curve between 4 and 5, right? And then it goes up a little bit more, and then it basically levels off until you get to kind of this mid-20s range where there's another bump, and then it drops off again, right? And I put in here car insurance rates drop and rental cars for this time period. I mean, there's a reason for that, right? So as executive function improves, the chances that you're going to do something reckless in your car decreases, right? So the car insurance rates go down. And you're allowed to rent a car at 25, right? And what else is happening at 25, right? Our cortex is finishing its development, right? So our brain is about as mature as it's going to be. So our executive function skills, and this is on a population level, not an individual level. they peak in our 20s, and then we have sort of this slow and steady decline from our 30s onwards. But again, this is on a population level. Individually, we can impact our executive function skills. We can scaffold additional learning at any age to improve these things, right? There are some advanced skills of executive functioning, being able to self reflect, being able to really do kind of advanced strategy. These are advanced skills. And, older folks rely more on some aspects than others, right? So, for example, older folks are going to rely more on strategies to get things done. So, if I don't write it down, I'm not going to remember it, you know, kind of situation. And, they will do less of the multitasking than they would have done when they were younger. Now, there's an asterisk there because I cannot help myself from telling you that you should not multitask. Like, just though it is not really directly related to this content, multitasking is terrible for productivity. No matter how good you think you are, you should not do it because there is a cognitive cost every time you task switch. You think it's okay, but then you learn that your quality of work is just not what you were hoping that it was. People think that they can do this, and I think mainly they think that they can do this because sometimes we can do a kind of automatic task like driving a car while doing something more with more cognitive demands, like, for example, listening to a complicated news story or podcast at the same time. But when we're talking about multitasking, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about, like, you're in a webinar and you're also trying to read a book, right? Like, those are two cognitively heavy tasks, and you are not going to be able to give appropriate focus to both of them. What you're going to be doing is switching back and forth very quickly. And it is that switching back and forth that is really the limiter for your performance. So why does this matter, right? Like, why does this make any difference to you? Well, at the very basic level, as a college student, reading, writing, and math matter, right? So, executive function really is tied very tightly to reading comprehension and being able to integrate the information into your existing knowledge base, being able to recall that information later, because if you remember that semantic model, the Santa Claus in the middle of the little bubbles and everything, being able to really integrate the information into that semantic model will provide many more options for recall than not being able to do that, right? So those two things are very closely related. And then, just on a really concrete level, staying on task during long reads can be deceptively difficult, right? If you're struggling with executive function in actually several different areas, staying on task during a long read can be very, very hard, right? For writing, difficulty organizing thoughts or staying on the prompt can really be kind of the indicator that you're struggling here, because your mind is wandering and you're not able to keep your focus on the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And, I see this happen in student writing all the time, where the thoughts are, it's not so much that when they're sitting to write down the thoughts that they're kind of jumbled. I think that is common for most people. But here, I think the issue is being able to go back and edit and be able to organize the thoughts that kind of made it onto the paper in a jumble and turn them into something that is coherent. And that's the tricky part, right? I don't think that anybody really expects that when we write our first draft of anything, that it necessarily is in the best order, that the language is as strong as it could be. I don't think that anybody really expects that. But, when we are able to go back and do editing, we should be able to do that organization, right? And staying on prompt this is also something I see a lot. If I often see, especially in essays, sometimes there's a final exam essay, and if the prompt is about something very specific, but the student sort of gets distracted by a thought that they had and then went off and followed that thought down a different road, right? So in math, how this comes out is really in more advanced math, is in word problems, and being able to sort of parse that and being able to pull those apart and figure out what is being asked, because you really have to track a lot of different components at once to be able to do that. And then the fast facts too, right? So fast facts, I would think, have a fair amount to do with the interaction between kind of long-term memory and working memory. These are things that you struggle with, is like moving things from long-term memory into working memory, then you would certainly have issues here. So again, why does this matter, right? So really, to be the best at our peak functioning, we really need to have these executive function skills in place, because for example, if you get paid on December 1st and you don't have the inhibition to keep a hold of and plan for the bills that are coming later, when rent comes due on the 10th of the month, you're not going to have anything left, right? And I think we all know people like this, where, they get paid and they are just not capable of thinking far enough in the future to be able to budget, right? Having a budget is extremely executive functioning heavy task. And, educational achievement is also like this. So, this class is designed around the concept that you're going to take the concepts of the course and apply the concepts of the course to your personal improvement framework, which is coming very soon, right? And, in order to create a personal improvement framework, not only do you need to be able to synthesize the material that came before, but you also need to be able to plan ahead for how you're going to apply that stuff to what you're actually going to do. And the rest of the class after you do that is really about time management and really about figuring out how to meet your goals in the context of, competing demands. In the second half of a semester, the pace always picks up, right? There's always more to do. You always have to balance more demands on your time. And so in order to reach the educational level of achievement that you want, you've got to use those goals that you created and that framework that you created to kind of strategize a little bit. And, that could be really, really difficult. If these are not skills that you use very often, you are going to have a challenge here. And so, the key is to, seek help when you need it, right? So, the last one here is that sound life decisions require it. So it allows for planning many steps ahead, right? You can see how your decisions now impact what happens later. So a good example of this is a 529, right? A 529 is a college um, planning investment vehicle. So, if you open a 529 on a child when they're born, and then you have 18 years for it to grow and grow and grow, you're going to have like twice as much money as you do if you open that 529 when they're 6 or something. And so, you have to be able to plan that many steps ahead, right? Instead of being like, oh, that's really far down the line, it doesn't feel urgent to me, right? And that's also part of long-term plan. And it really does contribute to solid relationships. So how is this, right? So if you think back to the slide with the different components of executive function on it, if you are not good at emotional regulation, you are probably going to overreact to pretty much everything that happens in your relationships with other people. And if you're not good at inhibition, you are going to act out that overreaction, right? And I don't just mean like in a violent way. That's not necessarily what I mean at all. But, you're going to have a reaction that you can't necessarily control. And to be a successful, functioning member of adult society, we really do need to be able to have that control over ourselves. So how does this all lend itself to improved health outcomes? Well, right. So again, if you think about the kind of statistics on whose health is best in the country and whose health is worst, the statistics are that young men are much more likely to die, right, than old men. Well, what? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it is because they have a tendency to make poor decisions, right? They're very impulsive. And we're talking here about, before that frontal lobe is done developing kind of stuff, And, if you think about the folks who are pulled over for speeding over 100 miles an hour, it is almost always a young man, whose frontal lobe is not done developing. That is not a coincidence. And those improved health outcomes are basically like, are you going to die early? Because it is not just about driving too fast, but it is also like, hey, is there diabetes in your family? If there is, do you know how to show some self-control and eat appropriately? Or are you going to just do whatever and then have to deal with those health consequences in sort of the shortish term future? And these things have impacts, right? So I mean, it is these improved health outcomes. The parallels are really, really stark. Okay, so they look like or can be caused by a lot of stuff. So there's a number of neurodevelopmental disorders that look a lot like executive function issues. And executive function issues look a lot like them. It's very hard to pull them apart. And you can spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. And there are people whose entire life's work is devoted to figuring those things out. But the idea is that executive function stuff is related to a lot of these things, and the directionality does not necessarily always matter. I'm not saying it never matters, but I do think that, nothing is so cut and dry that, it's not useful to say, okay, depressive disorders have a very real component of executive functioning issues. And if we treat the depression, for example, with medication, then the executive function stuff will improve. But also, if we put in strategies to improve the executive function, then the depressive symptoms will probably see some relief, right? So those two things are both true at the same time. So you can sort of intervene from either direction. There's a lot of different factors. The one that I want to highlight on this slide is sleep disorders. I think people really discount how impactful sleep is in the strong development and ability to implement executive function tasks. So sleep is a huge component of these things. And, even just getting an hour less than your body needs, the difference is measurable. So if you are somebody, for example, with sleep apnea, not getting it treated has huge impacts on, all of your cognitive functions. But I'm hoping that you will have seen, as we've gone through this lecture, that executive function really underlays all of them. And so, if sleep impacts all of those functions and sleep impacts executive function, then everything really comes back to that sleep, right? So, it's you cannot really disconnect all of these things from each other. But I would say that sleep is a pretty big factor. Okay. So, you need to have space for your executive functions to work, right? So again, we've seen this graphic a number of times, but it really looks more like this in actual fact, right? If you visualize our minds as the big circle, and in this particular circle, attention and social are the biggest chunks, and executive function is the smallest chunk. And so the issue here is that it's being squashed out by these other things, and so we need to find a way to give it some more space, because really executive function and memory are essentially the first things to go when we are working under a very high cognitive load. So if you're spending all your attention on doom scrolling and TikTok and all of that stuff, you're going to have a really, really hard time initiating a new task, for example. So, obviously this slide is for people in the in-person class, but it really also works here. This is an excellent opportunity for you to practice some executive function skills around focus. I really would encourage you to put your phone on Do Not Disturb, put it away, do not use it while you're watching this lecture, which is a good hour long, right? So, obviously I'm not there. I can't take your phone away. I left the slide in the deck to encourage you to not distract yourself with the phone, okay? Try really hard to see what it feels like to focus completely on the lecture. And if you find yourself wandering, your mind wandering, where are you in the video? Like, did you make it 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes? And then pause the video when you start to feel that sort of restlessness. Set a timer for maybe 5 minutes, right? And just sort of, we're doing it sort of Pomodoro style, right? Set a timer for 5 minutes, and when that timer goes off, sit down, put your phone down, and then continue on, right? And I think that you will find that your focus for the video is better if you do it this way. But if you don't set that timer and then you get lost in TikTok for 25 minutes or 35 minutes or an hour and 35 minutes, it's going to be very difficult to find yourself back into the mindset, right? So that's my advice to you about how to handle the video. And then as you watch this video, I really want you to think about what aspects of it are going to be able to help you with your framework, and kind of just like life in general, even if your framework goals aren't necessarily around these things. And honestly, it's hard for me to picture how none of, how anybody could write goals where none of them were related to any of the stuff, right? So I do think probably a lot of the stuff will be related to your framework. But also think about it in terms of the other people in your life, right? We all have that family member, that friend who is wound really, really tight, and think about those folks when you're watching this video, with some empathy, hopefully. All right, so here's your checkout with yourself. Remember that thing that you decided in the beginning that you were going to do within the next day, not necessarily today, but within the next day to try to mediate stress. Well, go do it. Okay. Now is the time to go and implement that thing. And if it's something that you have to wait to do until tomorrow, no big deal. Set an alarm on your phone so that you can remember to go do that thing tomorrow. All right, so thank you, and let me know if you have any questions or there's anything that I can help you with. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.